Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, wherever you are. Good evening, depending on your time zone. Just gonna set things up here, make sure that we're actually live on YouTube. Let's double check that. Yeah, let's see if we can. Okay. Hello, Richard. I guess I am live. Sometimes it's weird to figure out the YouTube controls. I started streaming a while ago. So anyway, let's begin. Just a couple of minutes late here. Had to reboot my computer to finish some upgrades. OBS wasn't happy with the older video drivers, so. But anyway, welcome to Ask Me Anything about event modeling, and I guess we'll touch on event sourcing as well. We had quite a few people sign up. We had over 40 online last time I checked. I guess I will share this stream on YouTube just on Twitter and Mastodon and all the other networks to make sure we get everyone in here. Let's do that right now. Yeah, if you have to come back, we're just gonna warm up here for the next 3 minutes, 5 minutes maybe, just to make sure everyone gets a chance to join. There's a share button. Let's copy that link. Okay, let's see. Good. Excellent. Okay, so we're live on YouTube for the event modeling. Event sourcing. AMA. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes here. Thank you for joining. Just 4 users right now. I'm sure after this goes out, we'll get a flurry of more people. You can ask your questions in the chat. There we go. All right. Hi, Trong. Yeah, good question. Have you ever done event sourcing CQRS for a system that is one process, e.g. one web application or one window application? Yes, Trong, absolutely. It's our default application. It's our default way of storing state for any application, no matter how simple. That audit trail is very important, so we always do that. It's one of the hotly contested subjects. Is that why is Adam doing event sourcing for every single type of application? It's not every single type of application, but it's for 90% of the applications, which are all line of business. It's simply nice to have everything there in terms of history for what you've done before. I'm going to try and share some of my past Miro boards to find an example, or we can also go and start a new one if a question comes up. So, hello Brandon Mull, nice to see you. Let me do that. So yeah. So I think I published that. I think everyone can see that link now. Let's just make sure we have that on. I guess LinkedIn I posted there as well. So I can paste that. There we go. And I think that should propagate to Twitter. I posted on Mastodon. I have a cross-posting service, so you should get there. Hello, Dev Agrawal. Nice to have you. We have some questions that came in actually because of the discussion on Twitter yesterday. There was a post on, I think it was a Java developer that was saying, here are the important 10 patterns you need to learn, or 10 approaches in order to learn how to program. So that kind of gave me an opportunity to, quote tweet to say that no, the only 2 patterns, quote unquote, you should ever need to learn, even if you're not a programmer, is event modeling and event sourcing. I got highly criticized for saying that, but it's the truth. It's what we've done and concentrated on to keep things simple, and it's only helped us to do so. Other people raised some questions as to, well, don't you use the circuit breaker pattern everywhere or at times, or etc.? And the answer is we probably do. I don't remember a single time where we called out circuit breaker in any of our event modeling diagrams and said, aha, that's a circuit breaker. There's a specific way to implement that, etc. We've always looked at things from just managing state and projecting state from past events. And that's all that we've ever done, and it's worked really, really well. So it reduced the amount of things we need to teach for everyone to know. So yeah, there's a lot of frameworks out there. Event flow. There's a lot of event sourcing frameworks that are that give you sort of an all-in-one opinionated way of doing something in a specific stack. So the only thing we've been opinionated about, and of course, and Service Bus is just the middleware piece for the pub sub. So like, part of the discussion there was yesterday was some comments from people in particular software that do in Service Bus, and got some heated debates there about what that solution does, etc. I would the full disclaimer: we don't use in Service Bus, so anything that I'm stating here about it is the direct sort of quotes of the responses from people on Twitter. Unfortunately, some of them weren't too flattering. I'm not sure if anyone's here that is from particular. I think a few people were, so they could probably take an opportunity to explain those things in that thread on Twitter. I think there was one complaint about having to do a wholesale upgrade change for an entire system because going from one version to another required all services in the pub subsystem to be started and stopped. So I don't know if that's true. That's definitely what someone stated is the nature of how you use that product. Again, we don't force a particular pub sub mechanism when we develop things. So again, in how you version your events and command handlers and read models and the event handlers within that is really up to you how your deployment is going to go. Obviously, what I advocate is always, change the subscribers ahead of time to be, a little more forgiving in terms of skipping an extra property that might have been added upstream, or to handle two versions of events that they may get based upon when the source service is going to start issuing new versions of an event. That is fully something that's in the control of the implementation, not not a framework that we're forcing one approach with. We do have a standard stack, but I think it's kind of more at the library level in terms of what you want to use for each step. So yeah, let's see. We have a technical pattern versus domain model. Yeah, technical patterns we try to keep, again, out of our hair. I don't feel they're useful. I don't think it's really helped us at all in terms of building solutions, large or small. That's why event modeling only has those those two core patterns of state change, state view, and then those two other supporting ones for dealing with external input or external output, or dealing with external services, depending on which way the information is flowing in to the third-party service or out of the third-party service. So that's pretty much it. And so Richard, again, nice to see you. I haven't blast from the past. I worked with Richard a long time ago in 2008, I believe. Yeah, so that's 14 years ago, probably. That's getting on to 15 years ago, so good to see you on here, Richard. Yeah, our standard stack currently is Node.js, and with TypeScript, we've switched to TypeScript simply because so many companies that are in the fintech space, etc., they want the type safety. The developers are used to that, so we used to just have plain vanilla JavaScript with React on the front end, and then of course an API built in just from Node, being able to be consumed by mobile applications if need be as well. Postgres for read models, and then event store for the events to be stored in chronological order, and use that tool. But I think 2023 is going to mark a big difference in how we approach things. I'd say a lot of our business has been kind of taken from a very hard-lined approach to event sourcing, and I think building event sourcing applications in the past required the infrastructure to be highly opinionated for event sourcing to push that approach through. And I don't think that's the case anymore. Losing information is a bad idea now. Everyone kind of got the message that an update or a delete statement are quite similar, that you are losing previous state. So we're kind of switching tactics. Event store is still going to be an option because we have a full history of many years of using that. In fact, predating my company, all the way back to when I was a consultant, still working alone. I was using event store for those solutions that I was consulting on. So there's a decade of experience there and work, which we're still going to continue to support. But on the operations side, every time we wanted to deploy a solution, it was always, well, your stack includes event store. What is this thing? How do we support it? What is the support like from event store going live with this and having it in our solution? So how do our ops people, from the DevOps perspective, how do we maintain this new type of technology inside the solution that you're proposing to develop? And that was a big piece of friction that we're able to move past and convince and show that it's easy to use Event Store. But now it's become more of a hindrance because there's enough projects out there that I simply didn't go forward because they weren't ready to onboard more operational complexity by having yet another type of database in there. So starting this year, we're going to basically rework some of the event store side of things for those companies that don't or can't, don't want or can't have event store in their implementation, and we'll have an event table in a regular Postgres database, obviously with a separate instance for the events if need be, or in the same instance, and just adapt the interfaces for reading events from a table versus a specific event store type of database. So that's 2023. It kind of marks an important point, I think, in the history of event-driven systems, is that this is now really viewed as quite a good default approach. And again, I go back to why we use event sourcing by default. It's because an account of record is the default way that information systems have been implemented over thousands of years. Treating information like money in an accounting system is actually better. It's not I prefer to do it this way. It's the most accurate way of storing state in the history of state in any type of, especially line of business application. So that message is kind of loud and clear, and because you have very few patterns there, core patterns to follow, it is actually simpler. So people get distracted with all the old posts about event sourcing and CQRS from 10 plus years ago about how complex this is, and it's not complex, it's unfamiliar. If you look at it at the core, event sourcing is a couple of core pieces that you have to understand in terms of how they work, which is really handling events, whether that's on the read side or handling them as you hydrate state, and then validation, handling commands of how you validate whether a state change can occur and cannot. And the only way you can acknowledge a state change is by storing another event. So event sourcing is the simplest thing that you could do. It's literally writing down that something happened and nothing more, and putting off the responsibility of the fallout of that change to any number of models that need to respond to that. You could argue that could be represented with one model, and essentially what you're doing is describing a traditional system within the knowledge space of event sourcing. But I think you're missing the point if you're going to be doing that. Event modeling will allow you to show how your single model is going to be coupling a ton of your workflow, and so you get a very messy event model from that as you analyze the impact of any state change across any number of workflows. So that's kind of a nice thing about event modeling, is that it is applicable to use the event-centric way of thinking to represent traditional things, which is essentially the forced way of using one model for all of your sources of the green and blue boxes. I mean, before I've presented that as, okay, switch out your blue and green boxes as to your CRUD commands to your SQL database. You could do that. I think it's okay. I mean, it'll show you the coupling, and that's all event modeling is a notation to really expose the coupling between the workflow steps in your application as you move forward and take steps to accomplish something. So yeah, there's so there's a lot of questions here. I'm going to try and keep it simple, try and answer them all, and address maybe a couple of things that we had on Twitter yesterday, because I think it's yeah. Yeah, so I guess some of the criticisms have been, laid out for existing companies taking into account things like sagas and whatever with particular software. And yeah, that was a big discussion yesterday. So my response really is that we don't use sagas and these patterns that other companies did use from an earlier on approach. So that's all. And sticking to old things means that you're not moving things forward. That's just my interpretation. If you're moving them forward within a certain scope, which is fine too. I just don't see it that way. So no, nothing bad intended there, but that's how I interpret it. If you're still doing the same thing 10 years later and not moving forward, then you're not moving the industry forward. So we've changed quite a bit. In fact, dropping event store as a default in 2023 for a lot of companies is not something that I do easily, but we have to move forward and move on. So anyway, that's that on that one. Let's see. Let's see what the next questions are here. All right, let's start at the top. We answered the single application workflow. Yes, we do event sourcing for single applications. It doesn't have to be a complex system that has pub sub in it, etc. The core part there is to make sure that we have a record of account of state, and then that implies that we have multiple models usually at play inside even a single application. Answered a couple of those other things about those things. So let's see. So I think the reason it works so well is similar to reasons that parametric equations help reduce complexity. It linearizes the problem. Yeah, so Brandon Mull says that we're linearizing the problem, and that's kind of how we see event modeling, is really stretching out complexity into these kind of building blocks of state change and state change propagation across time, and stretching it out to explain how everything is done. So, and we answer the standard stack. What is that? The official Axon IQ channel? I'm not sure where that's coming from, but Axon IQ is another framework that's out there. I know that there's a couple of companies that did use that I know of that did go to Axon IQ simply because the event store wasn't ready for the cloud and they wanted something cloud ready. I know there's a few companies that ended up doing that before, so that's my only experience with it. Okay, so this is a good one. I'm not an engineer and I have zero experience in coding. I'm a product designer and I'm a designing MVP for a video messaging app. Yeah, do I have to be an architect to do event modeling and event sourcing for the app, or do I have to be the app's architect? Almost. Yeah, so they're done with a high fidelity wireframe and about to look for engineer co-founders. So that's a really good question. And the answer is, yeah, the event modeling is meant to be the bridge between tech and business by understanding state change. And so by having a high fidelity wireframe, you're halfway there in terms of producing an event model. What you're doing is taking that wireframe and adding just a little bit more information in there, such as an example, example data as you go through that workflow, working on this by example approach. And all you're doing underneath is really taking a note of what information the system captures as you move forward, and then how that information is used to show further information on future screens in the workflow. So yeah, you don't have to be an architect, and that's one of the reasons we don't have all these patterns. We don't have that misunderstanding between business and tech, because if we start to require everyone to be an engineer or an architect to describe a system, you lose that communication. You start to silo that type of work into into a couple of roles. So no, you don't have to be. And in fact, that's a really good example of how you would start. A lot of ways into an event-driven architecture from a non-technical perspective is to take high-fidelity wireframes and fill them out with example info, stretch that out over time, show, kind of pretend if the application was live and ready, what would the screencast show over time, and then capture those key frames in that screencast. This can be done without the product even being done, and that's the point. And you put that down in your event model. From there, someone that you have as a co-founder on the technical side, they can interrogate that and use that as a schematic to then choose their favorite stack, their favorite approach to do that. It may even be traditional. That's fine. There is a few people that are using event modeling with just a regular traditional approach, which is okay. But it does show, at least your event model does show where you are, creating some updates to information and where you are losing that information, except maybe from database backups where that information may exist still, and all of that. So yeah. Do you host Event Store in the cloud? So we used to do that ourselves before Event Store had a cloud native solution. So we used to just have, in whatever service like Amazon, we would have an instance where you could, deploy whatever you wanted, and we'd deploy Event Store there, and use it in that way. But now Event Store has a cloud native solution for both, well, for all of the three major cloud providers. So that's been kind of the latest thing, which is helping a lot of the adoption. But still, like I said in the beginning, there's still a lot of companies that don't want to add the additional complexity of adding another type of database to their systems. So plus, one of the selling points of Event Store is really the incredibly high throughput that you get on the write side. I mean, it's built for storing events, which is really about scaling how quickly you write information. In the past, 7 years or so, or more actually, before I even started the company, we never really pushed any of those implementations to any limits of Event Store. So Having the same applications running with a table of events wouldn't have made a big difference. So the answer is still correct. I mean, that is the best way to be future proof, by having something, like event store deployed, so that you can scale on the right side to a much greater level than you would with an event table in a regular database. But the counter argument to that as well, if your abstractions are correct, then you should be able to swap in event store instead of that event table when you're ready to scale. And so that is going to be a smoother adoption path. So as companies grow and they have these scaling issues and challenges, if they are doing event sourcing properly with a traditional regular table for events, they should be able to swap in something like Event Store to take advantage of that scale. And of course, I think it's a select number of types of applications that would need that, and that would be where maybe you have high throughput traffic for something that's got revenue from advertising, and which is very slim margins, and you really need to push the hardware to the limit for the amount of traffic you need to support your business. So that's kind of where I would do that, look at that. So great questions, by the way. Let me see if I have more questions here. Yeah, we certainly do. Let's see, let's grab the next one. Is it true that you should never... is it true that you should never return data from a command? What if we need to return some confirmation to the UI? Are you going to look at the read model generated? So yeah, there's many ways to do that. That's a very common question. Is that once I issue a command, if you're following the typical projection, like, okay, I just store an event and then I have to wait until some sort of a projection or read model takes that in, and then I can actually answer whether this went in correctly to the system, and have an acknowledgement to the UI that yes, you've registered successfully, or you placed this successfully in your basket, or whatever your command is trying to do. There's two levels of this that you have to look at. So the most common one is really about allowing the process to be wrapped in the same web request as you're submitting the command. And there's nothing really about event sourcing that says you have to be asynchronous. So you can run through your command handler, do all the validation, check to see if the return value that you actually have an event processed from your, if you're doing domain-driven design, this would be your aggregate, see whether it's successful and whether you have an event that comes out at the other end. If it's correct and your level of feedback is just a green checkbox that it was okay, the fact that there's an event should be enough. If it threw an error, you can say that something went wrong, try again. And that's fine to have all that wrapped in the same request and thread, unless you're starting to see some scaling issues with that. Then you may want to have something like WebSockets or whatever, or just throw caution to the wind and make sure that the next page that you're on is going to get information from a read model that is updated in time to have that. And generally that's our approach, because that eventual consistency isn't as big of a problem as most people make out to be. But if it is something you want to be totally concrete about, you can even wrap the subscription side and update a read model after you get the event back as well. You can have all of that sort of CQRS pattern going almost all the way around in that circular architecture in a single web request, and even update all of the subscribers or some of the subscribers before returning back to the browser with confirmation. page instead. And so that's totally up to you. And I don't say that event sourcing or event modeling dictate whether you have asynchronous or an all-in type of I guess approach with asynchronous only. So yeah, a lot of people say asynchronous, this event sourcing and Synchronous are only asynchronous. That's not true. You can do whatever you want, and there's advantages to having things done synchronously when the scaling isn't an issue. Like I said, all the way through to the subscribers. You can start to change your approach as you build out your solution. As more more users start to use your system, you start to see some of these lock-in steps, synchronous steps, not allowing you to scale a little bit, and so then you can start to rework the solution a little bit to introduce some async stuff in there to just have as many commands handled independently of read models later. That should be fine. So, Trong, that's a great question, and yeah, really good. So there's some similarities with Redux, as Richard says. Yeah, so Redux stores actions and previous state on a stack in the memory. Yeah, so it's kind of how it works. It's definitely not just in the UI. I mean, it's really talking about the overall state of the system. So event sourcing is really about saying, whatever state change I have, I'm just going to put that on a ledger. I'm going to then take the logic that I would have had in the application above my updates and other places and put it into read models. So a lot of this is really similar type of development anyway to traditional. It's just there's a different place for the logic you're used to doing in a traditional place, and maybe some of those things that were done automatically for you by some framework maybe is something that you have to do explicitly in event sourcing, but not generally. That's not generally a big issue. It's actually a big advantage by being explicit about how you're treating past information in the system, and you have more choices there too to ignore certain information. So yeah, there is some similarities. The single path kind of way of thinking is similar to Redux, is that you have a highly opinionated way of how information flows through the system, where Redux is really on the front end cycle of how updates are going through. But yeah, take that similar kind of one-way street mentality, and you kind of have event sourcing explained. What do you lose by ditching event store? Well, first of all, we're not ditching event store. We're just offering a way to not have that obstacle of trying to introduce extra technology when we're talking to a client to say, well, if you want to do event sourcing, you have to do X, and we want more options simply because that becomes an issue. So so what do we lose by event store? Well, the good things that we lose is kind of that adoption problem. So we don't want to have problems, so we lose that. We definitely lose the throughput for the amount of events to be written and indexed, etc. A lot of the event store tech that's in there is built for event sourcing. So we need to replace that with logic on top of a regular database, which is going to be less efficient because databases are general purpose. They're not specifically written for just this huge influx of events only as the primary purpose. So I'm gonna lose performance for sure. But like I said, in terms of looking at what the performance footprint is from all of these different applications we've done over the years, that's not going to be a problem for 90% of our solutions, and it's going to remove this obstacle of adoption for 90% of future projects, which is kind of why we're doing that. And again, it's not ditching it. We're still going to be using Event Store in one version of our stack, but in terms of giving more options to people, I think it's positive. I think we held out this long because having Event Store in the stack was a driving force for that solution to do event sourcing properly. And I think we're past that point of adoption to event sourcing. So really good question. So yeah, most important part of ES is conversation. Events make it really easy to discuss with anyone how the application works, right? Even if you're not using event modeling, which we do by default, but there's other things like event storming and all sorts of event-driven collaboration types of diagrams that are very useful. And really, the end goal is to collaborate with as many people as possible, so that as many people as possible understand how the system works to the deepest level, because that level of understanding removes so many needless meetings and realigning people all the time. It's kind of why Agile exists, just to you have these scrums and all these other things to really add activities to keep people in sync, to keep feedback going through all sorts of different roles and participants and how a system works. And this active collaboration and understanding, events are a great way to do that, and that replaces a lot of this need for these feedback practices, which Agile talks about. They're fully compatible, of course. You'll probably find that in your Agile processes, your stand-ups are shorter, that your retrospectives are boring, which is good. All those types of things start to really bubble up as evidence of what design and common understanding get you. And have I used event storming? Yes, I have. And of course, I've used it incorrectly a long time ago, simply because we were highly opinionated on event sourcing. Definitely event modeling has its roots in event storming because of the workshop format. So yes, we have used it. I would say that we didn't use it to its full specification. We didn't use policies when we did event storming, quote unquote, early on, simply because we found that was another concept that just complicated things. So we didn't use that building block, and we noticed that we were just going off in a different direction, and that's why event modeling started. But I would say, yes, we did use event storming a while ago, not to its full intended in its intended format, especially without having policies in there, and just relying on this is the data, this is how we're going to mark these parts of the workflow to say the same thing as a policy would say. Especially with Miro, we didn't do hotspots either. I mean, I think we did when we were doing it with sticky notes. We started adding red stickers to areas where there was some questions about what's going on to mark that. But that's entirely been replaced by comments on Miro. The minute we see a bunch of comments around a certain workflow step, that's kind of our attention drawing kind of feature, that okay, there's a whole bunch of comments on this part of the workflow. Obviously people don't know what's going on there. We got to spend some time there, either make sure that it's filled out properly, or we explain in a different way, etc. And the other big difference, of course, that we did is with event storming, the UI is kind of more of a note. It's not really a central driving force, but as we were building out the company, we needed to have a place for all of the wireframes and UI specs to also live on that. So it became really event storming became kind of like the motivation. It's like, okay, this is going in the right place. The collaboration is wonderful. We love the collaboration. We just need to add the other pieces that are missing for us, and so that's where we kind of stopped using event storming. And because they have this common root in how collaborative the both approaches are, and the fact that they use events, it's totally fine to use both. And there's, event storming is way more popular than event modeling, and so we find a lot of people out there and companies out there that are already using event storming, and they find it quite natural to add event modeling afterward when they're finished with their event storming exercises, and kind of stretch out those workflows and start to explain things in terms of wireframes and example data, and linearize all of that information into something that's a lot better for driving implementation efforts. So they're fully compatible. It's really amazing that Alberto and Vaughn did all of this collaborative work, and the format of the workshop is absolutely 100% copied from event storming. That ability to brainstorm ideas together at the very first part in a common thing such as events is really powerful. So I have used event storming. Again, caveat is that not properly, and of course this was also back before Alberto and others have added the two different other types of event storming diagrams. We just do it all in one at the same from the very get-go with these other opinions. So yeah, definitely did use it. Definitely pivoted from that based on some of the specific needs that we had in terms of how implementation focused we were. So a lot of the things that I hear again is that, Adam, you don't spend enough time in the problem space, you're just going for solutions. Like, true, but our solutions are quite nimble, and so a lot of the problem space exploration is simply done by trying different solutions and seeing which ones give us better give us better performance in terms of how people understand it and how it's implemented. So you can quickly pivot out of a bad situation. And by using event sourcing by default, pivoting on the type of abstractions you're using or ideas you're using is also quite good. You can leave an old abstraction easily and adopt a new one, simply because of how how schema changes are handled with event source systems. They're entirely easy compared to traditional systems. So these pivoting from different abstractions is much easier, and so why we're not as afraid to go to solution faster than some others, simply because of that flexibility that's built in. But yeah, great questions. No sagas. Yeah, so one of those things that we looked at is there was a bit of complexity added by thinking that a long-running workflow in itself was a thing. It is a thing, but I think giving it a separate type of entity complicated how you think about workflows. So we kind of asked ourselves, well, what is a saga? Inside it has some state, etc. It's like, well, regular read models also have show some state in terms of projection, and so we simply started to replace sagas with some to-do lists that we talk about in event modeling in terms of the concept, but in terms of implementation, it's really the same thing that drives any other automated cron job or whatever, looking at a current projection of some state, and that may be coming from multiple services. So you need to add the pub sub to make sure that information is published to the place where your view of what a typical saga would have as state is located. So making sure that we move publish events to that place is something that you need to just show. The nice thing is it doesn't add that additional pigeonhole to say that this is a saga pattern and you must follow this to do a long-running workflow. So dropping saga from anything to do with event sourcing was one of the better things we did to keep things simple for everyone. I don't need to explain what a saga is to technical people or business people. I can talk about an overall workflow. I can talk about a subsection of that workflow and say that there is a read model here that is really talking about maybe the process of booking a flight, which is multiple steps and could be traditionally considered a saga. But in the overall workflow of booking a vacation, it's a subset. So categorizing these pieces is a little bit easier when you just free yourself from that box, because now you can say, well, is there a saga within a saga where we're booking an entire vacation, which may need a car rental, a flight booking, a hotel booking, etc. Where the flight booking process may itself also be a multiple step workflow, quote unquote saga. Do I need to force these abstractions into my workflow? And the answer was no, we don't. In fact, we don't really use sagas unless a client's been using them or whatever, or we just might use the word interchangeably to call a piece of a workflow a saga, but we certainly don't have any infrastructure or abstraction that forces those concepts in. It's yet another projection, and then just some things that are looking at that state and kicking off processes or kicking off other commands based on kind of that to-do list pattern that we talk about in event modeling. So it fits in with how you do any other step, and that's one of those things that we need to do to keep things simple, is not to overly add a whole ton of things. So back to that tweet that I talked about, the only two patterns, quote unquote, you need is event modeling and event sourcing, and everything else will follow. Yes, there are other patterns that you can kind of say, hey, look, in this book, this looks almost exactly the same as this, circuit breaker or whatever other pattern you know about. Sure, that's probably coincidence, and that's probably because that way of handling information is popular, and take a few groups, separately and put them in different rooms, they might very well converge on the same type of abstraction, and then you can call it a pattern. But I think it's better to look at it as something that falls out of a way of thinking rather than saying this is the end goal you must strive toward. I think you miss out quite a lot in terms of the possibilities that can exist from a fewer number of smaller, more fundamental patterns than trying to drive from the opposite direction of like, well, we should use this, I don't know, decorator pattern here or something, and go from there top down. I don't think that really works. That top down approach works really well. I've toyed with just having templates of like, oh, this is usually how you log in, or this is how you register, or this is how you buy something. But again, it's more of a template type of thing where I would imagine that I can just copy part of an event model. Here's how our Stripe integration happens in this other system and how it interfaces with our inventory system. I can copy paste that into a new system and adjust those a little bit. So, the word of pattern here starts to become kind of more loose, and so I'm not, in all of this, in terms of effectively implementing solutions quickly with high quality, the pattern stuff hasn't really helped ever. It's certainly only hindered. So I'm quite anti-pattern, if you can say that. But it comes from a really positive kind of goal of keeping things simple and keeping things available for everyone to understand. So that's the only reason I'm anti-patterns, is that it adds a level of complexity to needing to understand a solution. And yeah, maybe there may be places where that's unavoidable, but I don't want that to be the default, to say, hey, we must learn 50 patterns, and we're the geniuses here that are architects and technical people, and put up this really nasty kind of brick wall between business and that, and say that, you don't tell me how to do my job type of thing. These are simple. Most of these systems are simple, information slogging systems where you're moving information from this place to this place, you're changing it this way, you're transferring information from this to this, because you're cleaning up email formats or whatever, or you're trying to count your inventory. This is over and over again. I think we're really overcomplicating things. A lot of times we're taking that solution and really mixing it in with how infrastructure works instead of looking at how the business works. So keeping things simple is really one of those better goals than forcing a whole bunch of patterns. So yeah, no sagas is one. It's just another one of those patterns. It just simply falls into yet another pattern that we don't want to use. That's all. Yeah, so Robinson asks that there's some more tooling that's coming in. Yeah, there is a couple of other tools. I've heard about that at the beginning of November or October. There's one coming out from New Zealand. That's going to be out for event modeling and doing more code generation, again, because we're using very few patterns, quote unquote, just really command handlers and event handlers used in various ways. There's a huge opportunity that everyone sees that, wow, you can automate all this. Yeah, absolutely you can. And with all this AI stuff happening right now, as more people are doing, a number of if you look at just any kind of code pilot or any of these AI things, you can get ways of using a particular library or a front-end framework. But imagine that being used for a way to have AI tell you how to register or how to integrate into how to automate integrating to Stripe, or from a higher level, do a lot more for you, and not just have that AI stuck at some lower level. So yeah, this tooling around event modeling, I think, is going to continue to evolve. I think it's going to continue to evolve alongside event sourcing for quite a while. I think not losing information is really a good realization across the industry. I don't care whether you like event sourcing or CQRS or event modeling, etc. As you look across the whole spectrum, people don't want to lose information. They want to feed it into their AI systems, etc. So yeah, there would be unfortunately there's no news, Robinson. The project was in alpha phase, not ready to be announced yet. I think there may be an event where it's going to be officially announced. I can talk about it more, but I'll see. I'll definitely be posting information about those tools as they become available. So Richard says, also assume event sourcing is only useful for information systems. Game developed machine learning projects probably won't be a good fit for it. Yes and no. I mean, it depends on the game. I mean, if you're going to be event sourcing in a game and you have a whole bunch of leaves falling from trees in your graphics, I mean, do you really want an event for every frame that each leaf moves? Probably not. It's really, events are meant to reflect what your human mind is interpreting as the system doing for you. So in a video game, it might be events like achievement unlocked, or inventory full, or inventory item added. There's definitely a level you don't want to replicate event sourcing in those types of things. And yeah, there's certain places where it's not used. And if you're working on some research thing at a university, you probably don't want to have event sourcing and event modeling used for an algorithm you're playing with, and some traditional approaches of just having tables with input values varying and measuring and capturing the measured output. That's probably good enough for that. I don't think that event modeling is needed for everything. It's needed for every information system that needs a higher level of accountability, which is your insurance companies, your point of sale systems, all those things, because I think that record of account as to what happened is highly valuable for managing information, and allowing it to kind of speak for you and understand how it's changing so you can scale it. Like, also explain to business how it's going to scale, and all those things. Yeah. So that's a great question. And I like that you guys are answering some of the questions for yourselves too. That's great. So Brandon, thanks for chiming into a lot of the stuff. What you say is spot on. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, and a lot of people are pointing to the Slack channel. So if you go to eventmodeling.org under resources, there's a Slack link, and that's a really good community Slack group with a few channels there. The general channel is the one where most conversations happen. There's always a good number of threads to go and read through. So if you really want to find out, how people are going through their own journey of exploring event modeling and event sourcing, scrolling through a bit of that is helpful. Yeah, a lot of good folks on there that I enjoy talking to, and when I have time, I go in and answer a question if I have time. But it's really inspirational to me to see just how much the community has picked up, and how many smart people are helping each other out on that channel without me really needing to be there. So it's really warms my heart how people have adopted this and have gone in to do really good things in their organizations and improve their lives. And now they're doing it together without, if something happens to me tomorrow, this whole thing will continue to move forward on its own. And that's a huge goal accomplished right there. So I'm really thankful for people like Brandon and others that have been around and are helping people to understand. There's many others that I haven't mentioned that I would, it wouldn't be fair for me to single some people out, but there's been quite a few that have put in a lot of effort into this, and because it's helped them, they want to also share. So, and again, event modeling isn't really something that I feel is that special. I was just the lucky guy that was at the right place at the right time, that captured a format that spoke to more people, that helped do that. But that entire process, to-do lists and all that, there's Nicola, our CTO, that helped glue that together with real implementations that gave me the answer that said, yeah, talking about to-do lists does make sense. It's not just some stupid thing I dreamt up and people might like it because it's simplistic. It's actually tested against real implementations with Nicola and feedback and others as well at my company and other projects outside of the company, where we use that feedback from, well, if we do event modeling this way, is this going to make it easier to implement? And every time there was a yes, that's what happened. This happened before event modeling was a thing. This is how we just described systems. And eventually, event modeling was a needed name, just to give a name to what we were doing, and that's it. So, again, this is not something that was set out to be built. This is something that fell out of wanting to build better systems faster, and it works for us, and we've refined it, and so here we are. But yeah. Let me see what else you guys are writing here. I'm trying to catch up on my train of thought here. There's a lot of chat, so pardon me while I catch up. Yeah. So event sourcing, again from Brandon. Event sourcing helps with troubleshooting during development. And it helped with troubleshooting bugs in prod. Yeah, it's that history of state on the ledger is incredibly powerful. I don't think if you ever get a chance to work in event sourcing or just do it yourself, that is especially when times get tough, when you have bugs that are in production. I wouldn't dream of doing something without event sourcing. It's night and day for being able to capture exactly where things went wrong. So yeah, Brandon, you're 100% right. So I'll boil down to his difference between. Oh yeah, so Dennis, good to have you here. I also notice you've, yeah, you're the one that mentioned the Slack channel. Thank you. I had a really good podcast with Dennis. So if you have a chance to listen to that, it's on YouTube. Dennis did a great interview. Asked really good questions. So hopefully you can post the link to that, Dennis, in the chat, so it's there for people that are watching later the recording of this. That'd be really cool. So follow-up question. This is from the fellow that asked about the wireframes, whether it's okay to start using event modeling when you're just gone in and done a whole bunch of wireframes. Well, yes, let's see. So follow-up question, can event modeling still be used if we are starting with an open source app from GitHub to reduce the time and cost of development of MVP? Absolutely. Yeah, you can use event modeling to model your understanding of an open source solution. That's really good. And what'll actually happen is that it's especially if what you're using isn't trivial and it's quite big. Event modeling will allow you to capture your understanding of something that's larger, and as you refine what that tool is doing for you, you're really refining your understanding of how that library or project is being used. More so, it's also starts to really push things above the level. So in your above that level. So in your solution, you might start with customizing an open source solution or just using an open source solution, but then you start to notice that in your workflow, in and around that tool, you have some manual things. When users interact, they have to do things, and you start to notice parts of the workflow that are not answered by that. And then you can now add another swim lane and say, well, I'm going to add some customization or have another tool that I'm going to introduce to take care of a different part of the workflow. You can now map where information flows from one open source project to a second open source project. And then your event model really becomes an information management type of map for how your workflows move information between different systems. So an event modeling diagram can be used for entirely non-development projects where you're really just integrating different open source or other SaaS products together, but you use the event model to really document where information comes from, how it's used in different sources, whether those are manual, things that are done by users, or whether you have some automation in there and you start to sprinkle in some development. And that's a really good way of, starting your company and, your product that you're trying to develop, because it's an organic way to document what you did by just customizing or using an open source project. And then as your needs evolve and you get feedback from users and you start to notice the holes in the offerings that you're using, and you're going to say, well, there is some development that I can do here, and I'm going to have a really high value outcome for it, and start with really understanding the complexity of what you're going to be adding as custom development. You can make better choices about raising funds, etc. So yeah, definitely event modeling is used for any information system, which includes ones where entire swim lanes are just an expression of what you think the system is storing for you, this open source system. So highly valuable notation for integration projects where you're not really developing a lot, but you're integrating or using something that's out of the box. And a follow up on that from Dev Agarwal, is there a way to incrementally adopt event modeling? Yeah, there definitely is. Event modeling, especially in a larger organization, is not something you want to drop in as like hey, everyone on all teams, you're all doing this. That doesn't work for anything, whether you're talking about event modeling or or other things. So you certainly can have one or two teams or projects start to use event modeling. I think you can capture with read models and other things kind of where where you have the handoff to another team or another system that isn't doing event modeling. So yeah, we've seen that in a lot of companies, and it's quite typical because anything new is probably going to be done on a trial basis somewhere, and it's going to be one team using it. So yeah, definitely definitely something that can be done incrementally, especially larger organizations. Yeah, how do you get a product business analyst to want to adopt event modeling in any way? The Barrett, great question. For a lot of people that are already in product and business, they're already going to be familiar with some of the things that we have in event modeling, such as the fact that there's wireframes. So they probably already have some Figma workflows and things like that. And those are really good jumping off points to say that, hey, we can do better than just these Figma diagrams. In fact, you can embed Figma diagrams into Miro, and of course ONote as well uses that. So we're talking about tooling. ONote, Bobby Calderwood's project, is really an answer to some of the limits that Miro hits that you don't hit with that, and also the generation of schema for being able to go to implementation quicker because it has these proper code generation things in it. So definitely take a look at onote.com. Yeah, so for product and business analysts, they generally are the ones that love it. It's usually people that have their backs against the wall in terms of wanting to do event sourcing, that kind of put up a lot of blockers. But in terms of product people, I've found incredibly positive adoption curves from that section of folks, especially if they really care about their specs and specification by example, and the fact that they can reach deeper and further into the organization in terms of getting feedback and collaborating with actual people implementing it. I think it gives them that avenue. So I don't really remember a lot of places, unless someone was really stuck in their ways of I'm a product person and I only use this, but that's not anything about that role. That's just about baby duck syndrome or don't move my cheese stuff kind of problems, which you'll have with anything. But product people in general, the ones that are progressive, will want to use tools that make a better, give bigger impact to what they're doing. And event modeling drives deeper than what they're used to. So I find that if you're finding event modeling being hard to adopt by product people, it's more of a feedback about the product people than about event modeling. But that's just my biased opinion. So yeah, Barrett, great question. Have a new projection for an ongoing system. What is your process to capture all data from the very first event? Well, I try not to have projections that require information from very first event. So again, this is something to talk about, closing the books. And a real good goal to aspire to is think that you have to redeploy your entire application every month from scratch. That'll really start to make you think about this thing that's been sold in event sourcing, as that the great advantage is to replay all events from beginning of time. That's a really good advantage that you can do that, but should you do that every time is not, is really a question to explore. And, think about a trading application. Every trading day is a different set of history. In your online banking, every month maybe a different set of history. A tax system might be the current tax year. and you don't really want to replay events from the previous tax year. So those are the things that you should be thinking about, is just understanding what your footprint is for information to be able to run. And then maybe on the more analytical side, I want to view projections over multiple days, etc. Maybe that's where you start to think about those questions. But in terms of operating your system, you want to make your footprint as small as possible, and so you start to explore these different things about closing the books, or snapshots and other things, to make sure you're not needing to replay all events. And because in reality we don't do that. Like, you think about pen and paper and trading companies that were sending boats around the world for exchanging different commodities. They automated those systems based on record of account, etc. But they weren't needing to pore over multiple decades of data for day-to-day running of the business. They may look at it from time to time to get some insight, but in terms of making a read model to operate the business, they certainly wouldn't be able to make a runnable system where you'd have to pour over so much information every time you made a change. So that, that's my take on it. That's what I'm seeing. But Tron, great question again, and I think it raises a good point about, think about the footprint of how many events you need to really look at to keep the business running. You don't need to look at the events from 2 years ago to keep the business running today. Nadal, you made. Oh yeah, so Nenad Milic, thank you. In one of your talks, I think you mentioned that EM made a lot of Scrum meetings obsolete. Can you explain how that happens? Could EM be considered an Agile framework? Yeah, I think it can. I think for us, we didn't have the time. I started doing a new presentation, actually, by the way, a good time to point that out, where this comment comes from. So when I went to Perth to give a talk, I decided to do a new talk and do it from the perspective of only the advantages, not to really dwell on the details of event modeling and event sourcing, but to talk about things from the point of, what are some of the positive reasons why we do this only. And one of those was really not having any Scrum type of meetings. So we don't really have stand-ups, etc. We have a more natural way of talking back and forth based on push and pull by collaborating using the event model. So we're not jumping around from like a backlog of Jira tickets or sticky notes on the wall somewhere to the implementation, etc. It all seems to sit in one place on an event model. So when we discuss anything, it's kind of taken care of right there and then. We don't have to wait for a stand-up meeting in the morning to find out about something, or for management to know that things are falling behind or they're ahead or whatever. We can do that in a real-time manner. So what I think you're referring to is that we work on these slices. In the video you can see behind me that you can kind of see the things kind of divided up into these vertical slices of going across systems as time moves forward. So measuring velocity and who's working on what is really about, like, hey, I'm working on this particular screen and on step 3 of the workflow right now, and my colleague here is working on the next one, which is going to issue this command, and it's going to get verified this way. So it's highly visual, so you kind of know what's going on. That feedback loop's kind of made redundant because everyone's kind of in the loop, not to use a pun, but everyone kind of knows what's going on and what everyone is building. So the need for feedback from Scrum practices really does fade. I think it's compatible. I think, like I said earlier, you'll find that all these Scrum things are made way more efficient because people are already, they're not sourcing a lot of information in those Scrum meetings, which I think a lot of those Scrum meetings get abused for, as an opportunity to ask another question. It's like, how many times have you been in a meetup, a stand-up, I mean, where it's no longer about what I did, what I'm going to do, and what my blockers are. It's like, oh, Jim, by the way, I had a question about blah, and like, oh, thanks, you just blew up the Scrum because now you have you're interrogating Jim about something you shouldn't be using the Scrum, the stand-up for. Yeah, of course you're doing Scrum wrong. It's not a criticism of Scrum, but it's just generally what happens. I think, if you're gonna do Scrum or other Agile things, I think having event modeling in there is going to make sure that you can do it better, because you're not going to have abuses of Scrum stuff. And I think a lot of criticism of Scrum and Agile practices is really about you're doing Agile or Scrum wrong. Well, that's correct. Yeah. So let's find ways to remove the habits that make people do Scrum and Agile wrong, right? We take that to the extreme approach, is that we don't do them because we're so informed that the stand-up loses so much value in terms of answering, what the blockers are, etc. If you want to look at the blockers, you look at all the comments on the event model, and you can see who's blocked on what right away. In fact, people can go in and block things in a real-time way, not have to wait for a stand-up meeting. So I hope that answers it. It's just, having everyone collaborating is really the core answer there, and that people understand the solution. Then a lot of the practices that are out there just become redundant or not needed. But they're not incompatible. It's not that if you do Scrum you're going to ruin event modeling. That's not true at all. It's gonna be fine. You're just going to find that you're more efficient, that you can drop things, and again, because of time constraints and how we had to automate our company, we had to not do those. We just didn't have time for them. So and again, if the way that we were understanding a product or a service or a system was going to make it so that we didn't need to spend extra time in these meetings, then that was a positive. And so we dropped them, and we're kind of more of like a case study of what happens when you want to be agile but you don't want to do any of the agile practices. Well, you better answer the question of how do you know that everyone knows what they're doing and what to do and all that, right? So you just because you dropped it doesn't mean that the responsibility of the goals of Agile dropped as well. We still have those. We still need to know how the project's going. We still have to have a place for feedback for all those things, and event modeling does have that. So I guess event modeling could be considered an Agile framework. For us, it is. I don't think we can ask people to do that right away. I think you have an industry that's quite entrenched in those practices, and so just understanding that event modeling will work well with them is good enough. And then as teams mature and all that, you'll drop and adopt things that help you move faster with better understanding. For us, it was to drop those things. You may find the same experience depending on who's on the team and all that, and how your company works. So yeah, great question. Oh, Sarah, it might be Arian's event modeling tool from New Zealand. So Sarah, Tori, thank you for joining. It's good to see you here. Yeah, Sarah's from Axon IQ. Also a wonderful podcast I did with her a couple of years ago now during COVID, I think. Sarah, if you want to leave a link to our podcast, I think it's a good one that people could find out more information, which we don't cover here. But yeah, I think it did. So did Arian make an official announcement? And it was through Axon, right? So anyway, Sarah, maybe you can clear it up, and if it's made it. If he's made it official and there's a link, I'd love to go over it on a meetup with him and you maybe and others. It'd be really cool. Maybe maybe next week actually would be kind of cool to do that. That'd be kind of fun. Okay, so yes, Sarah. So you say it's not official yet, but the cat's out of the bag that the project exists, because I didn't know whether I was allowed to talk about it yet. So thanks for if Sarah, you know about it. I know that he's definitely talked to a few others. So yeah, I guess I could kind of give the broad brush strokes on that framework. It's an interesting take on event modeling. He has a way of doing that um, event storming, the brainstorming part, the early part. He takes it to another level and then folds it into event modeling. So it's neat. It's really good. It's built a lot like ONote is built in terms of using React and those components for how everything moves. So okay, so he did mention it. Okay, but maybe I have to be careful because I talked to him after September, I think. So I don't know. I'll be quiet about it now. I'll wait. I'll contact him and see if we can include a meetup with him on it to let him talk about it himself because I might be saying too much. You might not see me alive next week. Anyway, but yeah, really good project. Maybe I spilled a few of the beans here, unfortunately, but I will check with him and see how much more we can talk about. But really good to see lots of awesome tools coming up. Okay. Oh, he did a workshop on it. Okay. Okay. I'm pretty safe. Okay. So I'll be alive next week, but I'll talk to him about doing something here on this meetup. It should be fun. Really good. Really good perspective on user-centric way of thinking, and then from that, going into event modeling and all that. And it's really nice to see a whole set of tools. Really, the fact that there's multiple tools for event modeling is really not a competition between them. I think it's really a statement of like, hey, this really does work. Look at all the people that are doing their best to automate more out of it. And right now it's kind of like a rising tide floating all boats. So the fact, if it was going to be only ONote out there automating things, it wouldn't be as successful. Now you have Modulution, ONote, you have Arian's project, you have that test generation project from, I forget the fellow's name from Iran, but really, really good one as well. So all of these things are happening. I probably don't know about, another 3 or 4 projects that are out there. It's all kind of out of my hands, but it talks to just the great success of the approach and this kind of mindset for systems. Let's see what we can get. We got about half an hour left here, so I'm going to try and get through as many of these questions as possible. Yeah, great stuff about, again, about the Agile framework. That's a good way of putting it. So, Tomahisa has a good question. Are the rules for amount of events you must create with one command, which means creating multiple events in one command, okay? Should we avoid doing so? I personally try to avoid doing so. I try to stretch it out to say, okay, well, why is your command issuing 2 separate events? And is there a way for me to elaborate on that? I don't use it as a hard rule to say you can't. I mean, as long as you can trace the information coming from the command, you have a whole bunch of properties in that command. There may be 10 of them, and then in the resultant 2 events, you might have, 5 of them are in one event and another 5 in the second event that it produces. But I start to think about why are you doing that, and is there a way to issue 2 commands instead, and how would you coordinate them? And what are the reasons for the coordination? So, is there a to-do list that once the first event happens, now you have to have some process to create the second event? I think that elaboration is actually really healthy exercise to go through, because whenever you have these anomalies that don't fit the typical kind of slice in the workflow, it's really good to ask yourself why. And ask yourself, am I hiding something here? And a lot of time, I talk about this with the pub sub thing. Oh, this event just goes over and is this event in this other system, direct arrow. It's like, no, there's like a whole anti-corruption layer opportunity to describe, how the information gets cleaned up before it goes on the wire, how it's received and cleaned up further when it gets into the other system. those are really good things to think about and have a place for. So it's not wrong to do this command gives you two events, but I always stop on those things and ask myself, what's happening here and why is it two events? And can I describe it using more of the standard approaches, because I may be losing an opportunity to express something about why this is different than the rest of the workflow pieces, right? Yeah, your answer might be no, this is just fine with that. But a lot of times I find that I uncover some complexity when I look at a command ending up with two separate events. Let's see. Yeah. So, Sarah's doing a great job answering some of these things too. Thank you, Sarah. So, I'll give my own take, but it's really good to see you answering as well. Yeah. So if you look at the talk, so Musias is asking about the Perth talk. It was put on YouTube, I think, a week ago. If you just on YouTube search for event modeling in Perth, I should be there. Or it's part of the YOW conference, YOW. So you might also be able to do it that way, event modeling and YOW. It's a pretty rough presentation, because the first time I did it, nothing like doing a presentation for the first time at a major conference when you never gave the talk before. But I think it went all right. I definitely will refine it and have others. I'm starting to involve a lot more people in our business, and so you'll start to see not just me presenting on things, and there's going to be more. Obviously, in the workshops, we have our crew there helping out with the event modeling and the implementation. There's going to be even more people, so it's all growing quite a bit. Again, as I mentioned on the last AMA, I think, the workshops have just exploded, and I've probably presented to more than 1,000 people at workshops now, teaching all sorts of different sizes of companies how to adopt event modeling and event sourcing. It's just been taking off like crazy. A lot of people are able to do it, and they've swept away the excuses, and a ton of places are doing event sourcing now, and event modeling especially too. So great to see. But that presentation is going to kind of tell you some of those advantages. It's a fun presentation as well, because I added a lot of memes to it. So it's not as professional as some of the others in there, but it hopefully gives you a laugh. Let's see. Oh, okay. Generate multiple ones from one command, like name changed and address changed is the same command. Oh, okay. Interesting. So there's a slightly different take on that multiple event question. So I think what we're touching on here is, I think I give this example before, and it's the same information being changed, but you have two events and maybe even two different commands for it. So the example I give is, the system must record address changes. That's a blanket kind of statement. But why are those address changes happening? So it could be, I'm correcting my address because of a typo on my profile, or I am moving. Maybe there's an insurance company. I'm actually moving to a different house. So both on the surface level from CRUD look like I'm changing some properties. But in terms of the business meaning, one is you're correcting a mistake, and two, the other command is I'm actually moving and my address is now different, and it has impact on my insurance premiums, all sorts of things. So it's a good example of saying why CRUD is not enough. You need to have what you need to do is you need to represent your business in your system, not just account for information changing. It's a very superficial way of looking at it. So yeah, I would always encourage the expression of different motivations within the system, even though that the fallout is that, hey, I'm just changing the same row in the same table. That's great. What a great benefit that it's simpler to implement. But don't let that simplicity of implementation force you to make a dumb representation of your business and what's possible, if that makes sense. Yeah, let's just see. What do we have here? Oh, so someone's talking about a hackathon. We are having a 2-day hackathon next week, creating internal tooling app. Do you think it would be worthwhile trying event modeling, even if no one else knows about it? Oh, well, this is like a one of the first times that I saw the power of event modeling. It wasn't a hackathon. It's the speed at which you get everyone on the same page is incredible. So I would never consider doing a hackathon without doing some design, in terms of like getting people coordinated. But if you just say, hey, go do this hackathon and do X, try to do something, it's very uncoordinated, and people really in a hackathon are working in a manic kind of way. There's a lot of waste of cycles, a lot of that lack of coordination really costs at a hackathon. And so doing a half an hour to an hour of a really quick rudimentary event model is going to set you apart from everyone else in the hackathon. What you want to do is maybe do a light version of event modeling, which is at least get the wireframes of what you want to show with example data and events of what information you're capturing along the way. That's going to allow you to do an event modeling session within half an hour to an hour, which is what you need for a hackathon. But it's going to allow you then to divide and conquer this thing that you're going to create, because the people that are on your team in the hackathon can then take different parts of that event model and at least use the data that they see moving through the system as a really good way of coordinating the effort between each of the team members. And so, if you are doing a hackathon, you can get to a much better place faster than other teams that didn't take the time to understand the information flow through their system. And describing information flow through the system by example is one of the fastest ways to do that. So event modeling is perfect for hackathons. It's a secret weapon of hackathons. I've called it that, many times. And if you want to win a hackathon, spend the first 5, 10, 15 minutes, half hour, working on a whiteboard with some stickies to understand what you're going to do, and have everyone understand on your team, understand which parts they're going to be working on, follow the information through the workflow, understand that you have enough of these contracts between all of the workflow steps that someone's not going to be waiting on information from another system or another person's piece of work. It's really going to help. So yeah, those are very fun projects to do that. If your company has a hackathon culture and you do those types of things, event modeling is going to help you win the prize. It's going to also help you understand some of the systems you currently have in there that you haven't had exposure to, so you'll grow in terms of understanding your existing systems as well. It's really good. I don't talk about it often enough because I'm never not much in a corporate culture anymore, now that we're working independently as a separate company. But back in the day, when I was a consultant at companies or contracting companies, the hackathons were a lot of fun. The only time that we had that opportunity was for some sort of blockchain event at a university that we went in as one of the companies to compete. And I think we won that competition because of the early form of event modeling. It's exactly what happened. We had a very quick way of understanding what the system was supposed to do, and these university students that were with us, they ran with it. They knew exactly which pieces to build, and it was a really fun fun hackathon. So event modeling certainly can be highly recommended for hackathons. It's one of the fastest ways to design and collaborate and understand what people are doing. And that's the essence of a hackathon. If you don't have that, you're going to lose. You're going to have people spinning their wheels. So yeah. Thank you for that question. The next workshop we're planning on is probably going to be January because we're in the middle of December. So it's probably going to be something like January 16th. I have a whole bunch of updates to the website that I just can't get around to pushing because there's so many updates to the website, but I will announce it shortly. And it will be I need to announce it because it'll give an opportunity for people to use their education budget for this year or next year. So, with the announcement coming in the next couple of days here, the workshop will allow people to, if you haven't used your education budget for 2022, you can certainly do that. The workshops aren't that expensive, so it'll definitely fit in within your budget if you haven't used it yet. But also you can, use the education budget for 2023 as well. So it's kind of we got really busy here. We usually have a workshop once a month, but Vaughn's workshop that I had just exploded in popularity, and we had so many people that I had to split it into 2 separate workshops, and so I was doing a whole week of workshops for that 1 week, and that was kind of enough. I needed a little break from a workshop, so that's why there's no December one. So that's at the beginning of November, and it was awesome. I mean, it was really cool to see so many people in a workshop at the same time, and it was a lot of fun. So definitely gonna have one in January, and again, event sourcing plus event modeling, how they work together, and go through 2 days of intense exercises and topics. The thing that I like about it is that it really does allow people to work together as well. The workshop format, we try to do that to an extreme so people can talk about their ways of doing it, and then just have some hands-on time with me and our team members helping them out. So yeah. Let's see. Let's see what else we have here. When is your next workshop? Okay, got that. Where are you implementing the projection? Assume process a system as a broker command. So, yeah, so we're implementing the projection above the Postgres database. So as soon as the event comes out, we run an update statement on that table, and are done with it. So it's a fairly mundane type of code. It's the same kind of code you would do in a traditional application. You're just pulling the information from the event that you just received because you're subscribed to. So yeah. That's. I hope that answers that. It's not really a big issue. So when users log in, we issue JWT. Can you describe how you're going to do it as ES? So a lot of things like authentication is not part of the business domain, so we don't really do event sourcing. Like all that stuff is really about infrastructure and supporting code. So we focus event sourcing on the actual problem at hand, and the login status is nothing different than any other system. It's kind of proven to work through the use of that framework for many other projects out there. So yeah, we don't generally do that unless there's something specific that makes our login and authentication custom. Then we would do that, but I don't remember the last project where we had to do that. So yeah. Yeah, let's see. Hopefully that answers that question. That's the persuade management because of video. Yeah, if you need to persuade management, the talk that I gave on InfoQ, I think I pasted. It's one of the longest kind of workshops that's public out there. Quasi workshop. It's a free one that I gave. It's about 3.5 hours, I think. It's on YouTube. I gave a link to it last week in my Mastodon and Twitter accounts. So if you find that link from last week, that's the one I would give to management. I think it goes, especially if they're really interested, they want to have a deeper dive. I think the interview that Sarah did with me, Sarah Tori, who's here, I think that's a really good one to also give to management. Also, the Hansel Minutes podcast with Scott Hanselman, I did that a couple of years ago. That's a really good intro one as well. Scott asks some really good questions, so that's maybe a little more technical, but it's still really good. I think, yeah, Scott does a good job too. That's a good one. And of course, the old article from the website on eventmodeling.org is if people take the time to read it, they should kind of see the advantages and at least give them enough info to want to learn more and practice it in a project themselves. Let's see. Oh yeah, Sarah, if you're gonna join, yeah, absolutely, we'd love to have you at the workshop. So look for that probably around January 20th area. Sometime during the second half of January, I think is what's going to happen. But sorry, Sarah, to see you go. It's almost time to go anyway, but thanks for joining. We'll see you at the workshop. Jose, nice to see you. What is your alternate to sagas? I'm still wondering how you use event source coordinates legacy system when you need actions none are performed. Again, the alternate to sagas is to have a read model that says this is the state of this process and pull in the events that are going to give you information about that. I mean, that's essentially what a saga is anyway. We're just not bundling it in something that's called a saga. I mean, I don't want, again, back to introducing this to other people, I don't want to have to talk about what a saga is or have a different item on the event model to say that I have this. So almost anything in patterns that I find is just a well-named read model. That's about it. Or a set of named read models. So that's in day-to-day work. We don't use any of these pattern names, no sagas, nothing, and we still automate the systems just fine. So that tells me that those things aren't really providing much value. And so that's why the tweet was controversial, is that you don't need to understand all these things. You just need to understand two core things, and then out of that, maybe later you'll recognize that you implemented something that looks like a saga, or you implemented something that looks like a circuit breaker. But don't go the other way, wanting to build a circuit breaker because it exists and you think that would be a good solution for this. Go the other way and say, I'm going to use these simple patterns to get my work done, and then later on maybe find out that, hey, I implemented a version of a circuit breaker, or I made something that looks like a saga. But working from an end goal of patterns, I don't think is really good. It goes way too far into the solution of what could be done. So yeah. Yeah, so Jose, you emit a collection of events. Each one of them triggers the sync, which will happen eventually as long as it's idempotent. Yes, so you can do. I mean, this is really implementation details and the type of saga process you're trying to automate. Really, you're just breaking it down to that, and I would really just look at naming read models, something that's accurate to what you're doing, and then those implementation details, don't get in the way. And I wouldn't want to be guided by a certain language's implementation of a saga, let's say, and affect how I talk about the business workflow. I'd rather it the other way. I'd rather have the business workflow be well articulated, and then allow the implementation to be whatever it needs to be in that language. Yeah. Yeah, so you said, haven't done anything like that since I started. Yes, but that was the biggest challenge I had in the past. Yeah, a lot of people do have that challenge because they do end up reading about sagas in event sourcing and CQRS, etc. It's one of the biggest reasons why I dropped it, is because it had the same experience you're talking about. It's like a big challenge to understand. It's like, why are people, having a problem in adoption? And it's like, yeah, it's a sprinkling of all of these technical ideas and abstractions that's just muddying the water for a collaborative environment. So yeah, I'm glad that that helps. It's just with practice, you'll see if you just keep trying to build with the simple Lego blocks, the small pieces, then the other things you'll come to naturally anyway. But then you'll sort of see like, well, I guess I could call this whole thing a saga, or I could just leave it as this read model, and no one's going to ask me what the saga means, right? So yeah. Yeah, let's focus on information flow, and you should be good. But yeah, I think we're out of questions. So if anyone has another question, feel free to reach out um, on the Slack channel. Maybe I'm gonna just see if I can show the screen here. I don't think I have a capture of that, but anyway, yeah, I'll type it into the eventmodeling.org, modeling.org/resources. I think that's the link. It's in the chat, but anyway, there's a Slack channel link there. So you could join and ask some other questions. Again, if you forgot to ask something, jump in there. I'm going to have another one of these in 2 weeks or so, so we can discuss things again. Oops, do I have a typo? Yeah, let's see. There we go. So yeah, added the address there. Again, Mastodon and Twitter accounts you can find either or from either side. Just search for event modeling hashtag on Mastodon, or the event modeling channel on Twitter. And yeah, hope to see you there. If you have questions, more than happy to answer them also on those platforms, if you tweet them. And other than that, I'm gonna call it a day, and thank you for all the really good questions, and also for the participants that answered some of them for me. That's makes my life easy. Thank you, and hope to see you on the community channel on Slack, and on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the other places. Feel free to reach out. Again, next workshop, official workshop, going to be second half of January. Announcement coming soon. Just got to get that update to the website. So again, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again real soon. And Merry Christmas to those that celebrate, and happy holidays to everyone. Bye.